some of you may not know the name Signal49. It's a new name. The organization previously was going by the Conference Board of Canada, but probably within the last month, or I guess maybe 2026, the shift to Signal49. So if that's a new name, some of you guys may be more familiar with the Conference Board of Canada.
Yes, perfect. And I'm just realizing, Damien, as you say that, my next slide still has conference board in it. So
Growing pains. Yeah.
I am in transition. I feel like everyone here, we're talking about transition, so let's talk about them. Yes, the Conference Board of Canada has been around for 70 years, but we just rebranded as Signal 49 last month. So if I make a mistake, please be very gentle with me. It's hard to change. So thanks so much, everyone, for who's here and joining to have a conversation around what it looks like to really understand transition for neurodivergent students, and what it looks to really best set up students for success as they consider post-secondary and head into that big jump to post-secondary. So it is a half hour. It's half hour, so I'm going to go fast. I'm going to try not to talk too fast, but please feel free to pop in comments. Because it's a half 30 minute, I might not be able to address comments at the moment. But it might be a great way for us to come back to the Q&A and go through some of the questions or things that you might really want to dig into. So please use that function as you'd like. A little bit about me. I started my career as a classroom teacher in New Westminster, which is a school district just outside Greater Vancouver. And I worked as a kindergarten teacher as well as a supply teacher for about 5 years before I transitioned into post-secondary. I worked as a professor in schools of education, early childhood education at universities in both Canada and Australia. And to be honest, I just really love research. So I do move between research and teaching roles and practice roles often, but I'm currently in a research role that I absolutely love. I lead the neurodiversity research portfolio at Signal 49, and I, in my own journey, learned that I'm also neurodivergent. I'm a late identified autistic educator and researcher and human. I'm also a parent. I have an 8-year-old neurodivergent son as well, too. So I bring a lot of different hats to this work, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to have a conversation with largely a guidance counselor audience, because you folk are the ones that really are so well situated to really support students. So I'm really excited to bring some cutting edge research, but yeah, I'm actually really excited about it. I've been leading research that really has not been done before to try and capture the experiences and understandings of neurodivergent individuals, both in education and the workforce. And I'm just bringing some evidence-based strategies and actionable recommendations from that research here to you today. So as I mentioned, there is a research portfolio. I'm busy just doing lots of neurodiversity research at the Conference Board. When special interest hits skill set, neurodivergent people can do amazing things. So I'm gearing up for a fourth large-scale national neurodiversity study in 2026 that'll look at work-integrated learning. But the information I'm bringing you today comes from 3 large-scale studies that looked at neurodiversity in the workplace, neurodiversity in post-secondary education, and alternative employment pathways for neurodivergent individuals. So this is big bodies of research with the lived experience of over 1,000 neurodivergent Canadians I'm bringing to you today. So just in a bit of a nutshell, what are some key things we need to be thinking about in relation to transition for neurodivergent students? The biggest thing is that, and thanks to you folk and the K-12 system, more and more neurodivergent students are completing post-secondary in academic tracks, and they're headed in academic pathways, and they're headed to post-secondary. That's fantastic. That really speaks to the deep work, care, and understanding and flexibility of the K-12 system in being able to support diverse learners continuing to move through academic pathways. But despite that we have higher than numbers of neurodivergent students transitioning to post-secondary, they are facing barriers, and they have lower completion rates than neurotypical students. So we see that access is becoming less of a barrier, but the continuing barriers at post-secondary are still quite problematic. And that really is because the academy was not set up for neurodivergent students. Now, of course, the academy is full of late identified or not identified ND folk. And often that is folk who are very academically inclined or whose brains really work better in research roles or science, engineering, these types of things. However, Even neurodivergent folk who work in post-secondary all feel high amounts of stigma and misunderstanding just because that system is not well set up for diverse learners. So institutions are trying, though. I talk to post-secondary institutions across the country on a weekly basis, and I see the work that they're doing, but it's really hard to catch up this system that was never meant to be inclusive. It certainly was not ever started to be inclusive, and it is very hard to retrofit in accessibility inclusivity, but we're working on it. So really what needs to happen though is while we're working on making post-secondary institutions more inclusive and neuro-inclusive specifically, we do actually have to build the skills and self-awareness and self-advocacy skills of neurodivergent learners to be able to navigate systems not built for them in ways that feel reasonable, supportive, possible, and helpful for them. So that's really where this presentation is focused on what students, families, schools, and guidance counselors can do to support the transition. I'm also working with post-secondaries to try and do that work on their side as well too. Both parts have to come together. Sorry, I never know where to put this little guy. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to skip through the outline just so we have more time. So just really quickly for accessibility services, this crowd I'm sure is really familiar with it, but essentially that's the office or services on at post-secondary that take accessibility requests or support students with documented or diagnosed disabilities or other learning needs. Now, while accessibility services, many of them are fabulous and fantastic, they really do vary. So the University of Toronto, for example, has 60 full-time positions in their accessibility services. I also talked to polytechnics or colleges that have 1.5 FTE in their accessibility services. So I just want to highlight here for an audience that really is quite au fait with this, is that a good understanding of kind of when students are thinking about that transition and where they're going to go, what is offered or what is available is going to dramatically depend on the institution, the program, and the supports that are available. So when thinking about accessibility services, it really is very unique to the specific institution. They are not all the same. They do not all operate the same way. What is generally certain across the board, though, is if a student does not have a diagnosis, they are not going to be able to register with accessibility services. It's very, very rare there is any wiggle room on that, and the documentation criteria is very high. Like, for example, sometimes I have guidance counselors or schools telling parents that an IEP is enough to register with accessibility services, and it is generally not. Many students are turned away with that level of documentation. So just that point there is that accessibility services are very varied, and making sure that if you are advising students and families on what they would need in order to register or engage, that you are very clear on what the requirements are for that institution. Another challenge with accessibility services is that often students really want to take a wait and see approach before they sign up or consider signing up to accessibility. I will talk about disclosure in a minute because it is a hot button topic, but I do just want to talk about this point here. So I understand the wait and see approach. A lot of students, after getting through high school, possibly with accommodations or supports or just a different way of doing things, and they're at university, they're really excited, this is their next big step. They don't want to be seen as different. They don't want to be othered. They don't necessarily want something different than other students. A lot of them just want to, be like everyone else, be like that neurotypical student. However, diverse learners learn differently, and different brains certainly attend to classroom learning. And one of the biggest differences for students when they start post-secondary is simply just the pace of learning. Things come so fast. Assignments come so fast. Midterms are there right before you know it. And the problem with that wait and see approach is that if a student does wait until midterms to see if they need help, it is too late for them to get supports for that semester. The process to actually register with accessibility services, meet with the advisor, gather the documentation, and get the accessibility plan can take anywhere between 6 weeks to 5 to 6 months at most institutions. So while I get the wait and see, it actually can be very challenging and cause a lot of neurodivergent students to really sort of either struggle or barely get through the first semester, have to unenroll, or simply fail or have to redo courses, which is a huge financial and time penalty for these students. So if a student has had accommodations in high school, what I really try to encourage is that rather than taking a wait and see about registering with accessibility services, you can always take a wait and see approach about actioning those accommodations. So I really do encourage students who've had accommodations in high school to register with accessibility services because they actually don't have to pull the trigger on getting those supports. They can simply just have everything ready to go and in their accessibility plan. And once they have that, it's actually their choice which instructors they share it with, which faculty, how they share that information, but they have it ready to go. So again, this is around making sure that students have what they need, but they still have the choice and autonomy to decide how and when they're going to action it. And the last point I want to take here is around that building the self-advocacy skills. Here's where I really recommend body doubling rather than doing things for students. I know guidance counselors are not the ones doing things for students, but I'm sure you're seeing this with families. Often families with neurodivergent students, parents are doing a lot of extra work. They're busy. They've been, there trying to get the supports. They've been there trying to support students, and they often can take on a lot of this work, which means that the students aren't building the skills themselves. So here's where if you're working with families, it might be a great opportunity to say a body doubling, if you don't know, means just literally sitting next to someone and keeping them on task or on track while they do their job. I do this, my partner has ADHD, my child is dyslexic. I body double them all the time for tasks. They also body double me. So again, not taking the work from the student, but actually sitting there and being a support while they do it. And those are skills they absolutely will need for post-secondary. So disclosure is really tied into accessibility. I really want to talk about this very clear. On the right-hand side, this is actually the rates of disclosure for neurodivergent Canadians, both in post-secondary and in the workforce. Right now, currently, less than half of neurodivergent students actually tell their post-secondary that they're neurodivergent. This is actually even worse than workplaces where only about 50% of workers disclose to their workforce. Sorry, I realize there's an issue with my slide, but that 50% is workplaces. So we actually have a group of students that are really not wanting to share that they're neurodivergent, not wanting to disclose. Now, higher support needs students, especially those with multiple diagnoses, they might be really used to disclosure, or their difference or their neurodiversity might be something that people notice quickly. So therefore, that disclosure dilemma might not be as prudent for those higher support needs students. But for students who can mask or do mask or really like to try to fit in, that disclosure piece can be really tricky because they might feel like disclosing really puts like a target on them, or that they might experience a lot of stigma or misunderstanding. But conversely, not disclosing and getting the supports can also have a lot of negative implications because different learners need different things to be successful. It's simply just the case. Different brains need to learn things in different ways. So this is where this disclosure being a choice is really, really important to have to talk about with young people who are neurodivergent or suspect that they are neurodivergent. Because unfortunately, stigma and discrimination is likely to happen regardless of disclosure. And I really do hate saying that, but as an autistic person in the world, I do definitely see it. I do experience it sometimes. Whether that disclosure happens or not, that stigma is there. That being said, disclosure is a really personal choice, and helping a student or young person to understand when they would want to or how they would want to do that is really important. And the big piece I want to pick out here is that even without disclosure or formal accommodations through accessibility services, it is really essential, though, that students are building information about their cognitive profile. So not just I'm autistic or not just ADHD. What are the areas of strengths? Like I'm great with pattern recognition. I'm really creative. I come up with innovative solutions to problems. And also functional limitations. I have working memory challenges. I have problems with self-regulation. I have problems maintaining focus and motivation. So understanding their profile, their strengths, and both their challenges is really important, because if a student knows they have a working memory challenge, the strategies and supports they're going to need are actually many things they can do themselves and layer on these supports themselves via a formal disclosure or accommodation process. Now, I did just want to dig in a little bit to disclosure because perhaps you're surprised that so few students disclose at post-secondary when the rates are higher in K to 12. But again, this really speaks to the stigma and discrimination. But I did ask the question. So this is a survey to 400 neurodivergent post-secondary students about to those that chose not to disclose, which was 230. So I asked these 230 students, why did you not disclose? And the number one answer up here was, well, I don't require supports or accommodations. Perfect, right? That seems easy. If they don't need anything, they're not asking for it. That's perfect. That explains the disclosure rate. But if you drill down into the data a little bit more, we see that's actually really not the whole story. 73% of the students who did not disclose also identified stigma, anxiety, and a wait and see approach around accommodations. So really that lack of wanting to disclose is often rooted in a misunderstanding of what the value is, how problematic the process is, or how stigmatized the process is. So these are really important conversations to be having with a neurodivergent learner to really think about what they feel comfortable with in terms of disclosure and how they would like to do that. And why, well, of course, disclosure is a choice. I really want to highlight the importance of having individualized supports and strategies because students who did disclose, that is the lighter blue, were more satisfied than students who did not disclose. And this is actually across the board for different neurotypes as well too. So again, it's not that necessarily disclosure meant better, higher satisfaction, but disclosure generally meant access to supports and accommodations, which then did confer with higher satisfaction rates. And in case you're wondering, because I don't break down the data very often in this presentation because it's so quick, disclosure rates do vary significantly by identity or diagnosis. Autistic students are the least likely to disclose. Students with multiple diagnoses are the most likely to disclose. And here we can see that is the students, this one here, are most likely to disclose if they have multiple diagnoses, least likely to disclose if they're autistic. Again, this population likely has quite a complex learning profile. They're likely used to disclosure or accommodations or need them and know that. They're here. This is my fellow autistics here who often might be able to mask or hide. These are lower support needs students who really fear disclosure. So, and we can see here ADHD, mental health, stigma is lessening a little. So depending on the identity or diagnosis of the student that you're working with, you might see different levels of resistance in terms of disclosure and accommodation seeking. And this is a great point to be having a conversation around why. And again, if a student does not want to, that is absolutely, sorry, my Teams is going off here. That's absolutely fine. But if they're not going to seek accommodations through the post-secondary, they're really going to need to be thinking about the individualized supports or strategies they will need to succeed. So, and this brings me to my point here is that success in post-secondary is going to come much more from individualized supports and strategies that the student can put in place versus getting things through the school because the available accommodations in post-secondary are so limited. When I read IEPs in high schools, which I used to do really frequently in my previous position, I would see accommodation lists that sometimes they were incredible. I would see sometimes 15, 16, 20 or more really individualized, personalized accommodations that made sense, really helped that student, reduced barriers, that student is thriving, that's great, they're getting to post-secondary. Unfortunately, when it comes to post-secondary, there are basically 3 accommodations that across the board are greenlit, and the rest can honestly be fights or no's. So alternate or accommodated exam or test location, that's almost always a go. Additional exam or test time, 1.5 time, that's an easy one. Extension requests, these are easy. These are what most students have without problems. However, accommodations like note-taking, recording a lecture, access to recorded lectures or slides material can be some of the most difficult accommodations to get in place. Often faculty are unaware perhaps of their duty to accommodate or simply misunderstand privacy and intellectual property. But essentially getting a note taker or recording lectures can be very, very problematic. And a lot of students are either turned down or their accommodations or what they're used to is not possible. And this is actually really stressful. You imagine having a high school student that's had quite extensive accommodations throughout high school and parents that have worked with the teachers and counselors to figure out that whole perfect mix of accommodations that are making it work. And then they go to university and realize that these three things are the only thing on option. So again, sometimes helping students and families understand that and giving that information ahead of time can be a really important strategy so that all of a sudden it's not panicky 2 months before university starts when it seems like a glaring lack of accommodation is a really big problem. And some of this is because the post-secondary system is not very flexible, but other times it's because the accommodation simply doesn't work. For example, in high school, often front of class seating is a common accommodation that makes sense, that works well for students. Think about it in a 400-person lecture theater. One front of row might actually not be the best place to see the screen or the materials. It might also not be the best acoustically. Also, 400 students sit there for an hour and then leave, and 400 more students come in. Who would be the one to block off the seat, right? Like these things are simply not possible. These rooms just are used, and people come in and people come out, and people come in and people come out. So again, this can be quite tricky. So this is really why it's really important that students are thinking about what they actually can do on their side in addition to these three accommodations they're very likely to get around study skills, around building executive function skills. And I'll talk about that in one of the further slides. But here, this is the survey to a 400 neurodivergent students, again, about their biggest barriers as a neurodivergent student. They did not say executive function. They said things like staying on task, submitting assignments on time, not needing extensions, keeping with readings. But those are really around executive function and pace of learning. So I coded student responses, but you can see here that the challenges around executive function were 2 to 3 times more challenging than any other part of post-secondary. Harder than the pace of learning, harder than social communication or group work, harder than getting together their documentation, harder than mental health. It's this executive function. Now, on the negative side, post-secondaries actually generally test executive function more than they test intelligence. If students have gotten into programs, they are cognitively capable, but their executive function is what is letting them down. On the plus side, executive function can be built and strengthened, which is actually really exciting, but it's hard work. So that's the tension there. Pace of learning and social communication. So I'm actually going to focus on those 3 areas in the next 6 minutes. I'm going to move quickly. Okay. So challenge number 1, executive function and study skills. Why it matters? Because they sit in a lecture for 1 hour. There's an hour of talking at them, and then they have 3 hours of reading and notes and work to do afterwards. That is incredibly different than high school, and it is really, really tricky for them to do. So the biggest areas that students are having problems in is working memory, especially ADHDers, that working memory, ability to hold information in your mind and move it around and remember it and output it. So tricky. Task initiation, attention and focus, time management, planning and organization. These are all problems that young people, especially in our social or in our digital world, tend to struggle with more. Also, students with ADHD, which is almost 60% of neurodivergent students in post-secondary, identify ADHD as whole or part of their neurodivergent identity. These tasks are a big challenge for these folk. So that's really where the focus needs to be. So post-secondaries are trying to do a lot to help students with executive function, but this is quite new. Talking about executive function in terms of learning is relatively new. But some things that are happening in post-secondaries across the country are workshops on focus, attention, and study strategies. These all mirror workplace productivity skills. So again, start to learn in post-secondary, take them to the workplace. Access to learning strategists or executive function / ADHD coaches. Some institutions have these roles too now, ADHD coach or learning strategist, executive function coach. These are experts at these challenges for neurodivergent students and are so valuable. They also exist out of the post-secondary system. Can be tricky to find the right person, but some exceptional humans do this work. Study skills courses and peer groups for accountability and follow-through. The next one is about templates for task management. So if a student has to share with 8 different faculty across the entire year that they have an accommodation plan, and this is a little bit about them and what they're going to need, how can they create a form email that just they send out over and over again just to reduce that workload. Assistive technology that supports organization, workflow, and communication. That could be using things like Pomodoro timer in terms of like work and taking breaks. It can, in terms of using like planning for assignment submissions, studying, drawing out like a big like understanding of the semester and when things have to be done. Different types of organizers, graphic organizers for students with perhaps learning differences, learning disabilities, like written output challenges. Again, like there's no secret sauce that's going to work for every single student, but there's no neurodivergent person I know, including myself, that really doesn't have some significant functional challenges around executive function. But that's where assistive technology supports and strategies need to come in. So the bigger the challenge, the more specific the strategy is needed. And that's where sometimes helping with learning strategists or executive function coaches can really help. The next big challenge I wanted to highlight is around changing communication expectations. So again, in high school, a student has an IEP. That IEP goes out to all their teachers, and their teachers are hopefully reading it, engaging with it, and implementing those accommodations, and everything's great. That student should only really be needing to like perhaps self-advocate if something is not going well, perhaps at their next IEP meeting, something such and such. Now comes to post-secondary, and they have at least 8 different teaching faculty a year if they have a full-time course load, plus perhaps TAs or lab instructors or other people. And it's their job to talk to every single one to tell them exactly what they need to know to help support them. That's a really big challenge for a lot of neurodivergent students, especially those who might have had a lot of parental help or support with advocacy. So they need to learn how to do this, and they need to learn, and what they really benefit with help with is finding the easiest way to do it, because this just can seem really overwhelming. So helping students keep on track with like email communication, like creating folders, flagging, tagging things they need to come back to, setting up systems for requesting the accommodation. Remember that alternate exam exam setting accommodation? They have to email a week before every single exam in order to activate that. So they need that reminder in their calendar across the entire semester. They might need help with asking questions or clarifying instructions. Again, some neurodivergent students might be slow processors, so they might just be sitting there and thinking, but by the time they have an idea and want to raise it, the conversation's already moved past. Or they might be taking up too much of the conversation. They might always have their hand up. They might always be participating. So sometimes they might need a little help or feedback on ways to participate in ways that support them and the rest of the class. And that leads on to group work and peer communication. And what I really say to all neurodivergent students is that if something isn't going quite right, or something seems confusing, or someone's behaving with you in a way that just doesn't make sense, find that trusted support person. It could be your accessibility advisor. It could be another trusted adult or educator you're working with, and just get some help, because sometimes it's just a lost in translation. And the amount of times that unfortunately I've seen a student end up in student misconduct over just a misunderstanding that could have been sorted with a little more help just tells me we have a lot to do in really helping making communication more neuro-inclusive. So we all need to be more accepting of diverse communication ways of communicating, but we also need to be giving very specific and helpful feedback to neurodivergent individuals about their communication. Because if they're communicating in ways that are seen as really unhelpful, abrasive, rude, or confrontational, that's really not going to help that person build the skills they need for a workforce transition, because that confrontational student is seen as that confrontational worker. And as someone in many jobs who's been seen as not a team player and not, good at fitting in, it's because I really didn't get the feedback that I needed to understand where the problems were. And I'm getting there eventually. Here I'm at 42 now. But, this feedback needs to come much earlier. And I think often what happens is neurodivergent people sometimes are acting a little differently, and people don't know exactly what to say or how to help, and everyone just kind of ignores it and hopes it goes away. But sometimes it becomes a very big problem. So respectful and feedback is so important. Neurodivergent people do not get enough feedback. So please keep it coming. Here we go. So, and how can you help support that? Explicitly teach academic and professional communication norms. They might be norms to you that you've sort of through osmosis figured out by watching other people. That does not work for neurodivergent people. They need to be taught it explicitly. That doesn't mean do it like this or it's wrong. That means here's what people expect. Here's your strengths and understandings and what you're trying to do. Where do they come together? Offer structured times for practice. Help the learner clearly define their role and responsibility for group work. What is their job? How are they going to do it? Looking for and helping them build structured opportunities for peer connection and mentorship. Peer connection and peer mentorship works best for neurodivergent people by and with neurodivergent people. Not to say that mentorship and connections with other neurotypes can't be helpful, but it is not helpful to have a mentor that doesn't understand your lived experience and how your brain works. So really connecting neurodivergent students with other neurodivergent people can be really helpful. Okay, and last one. Oh, I'm run over. Sorry. I'll be quick, but I hope some people are still with me here. It's just around a reduced course load. Students do not want to take a reduced course load because they go, I want to do this in 2 years. I want to do it in 4 years. I just want to get it done. However, it is much better to take a reduced course load and complete courses than having to redo 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 courses. Sometimes I hear from neurodivergent students because they didn't have the supports they need. It was too much and they just continued to not do well. And once you failed a course twice, you often cannot take it again. So it absolutely closes doors. So what if you don't already know, but you probably do, and students need to know, is you only need a 60% course load to be full-time. That's it. 40% with a permanent disability. So suggest really trying to get students to start with that reduced load is the most important protective strategy you can. Now, I recognize that not all programs allow for that, and some programs are so not neuro-inclusive because of that. But just being aware of that might help find programs that offer that reduced course load, which can be a great fit. So all of that, I promise to end soon because I know I'm over time. How can educators, counselors, and families help neurodivergent students with this transition? The big things I would say are normalize asking for help and not be like, fix it for me. Asking, be like, this is the problem I'm having, and I'm needing to think of strategies. That's the type of help we want to normalize. Teach communication and executive function strategies or help them learn them. Try new things. Just hoping things will get better is not going to work. Skill building needs to happen. Encourage early connections with supports. So like get that accessibility plan in place, even if you're not going to use it, but it's in place and it's ready to go. Validate students' experiences with systems navigation. Navigating systems suck as a neurodivergent person. It does suck, but it also needs to happen. So like leaving space for how challenging it is, but also just moving ahead and building skills. And then promoting autonomy and self-awareness because these students might not have had a lot of extra help, but they need to start learning for themselves now. And the big thing I just want to remind anyone who works with neurodivergent people or a neurodivergent person yourself is that when things feel difficult, it's not you, it's not just them, it's not just, it's not a person with personal deficits. This is a person that is navigating a system not built for them. So their struggles are not failures, they're signals to try new strategies or supports or approaches. So I would love it if we could all keep that in our mind because that really helps moving forward. And right before I end, if you're interested in any of this information, this is a 2-page guide for neurodivergent students that covers a lot of the content that I've talked about today that is downloadable. These are all free and accessible. There's research reports. There's all sorts of really great things. I can talk about them more if there's questions. All right, I'm going to stop there, Damien. I'm so sorry I'm
No.
over. That also does not surprise me, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah. Do not apologize. I think the reason everybody stuck around is because we want to hear what you have to say about this. So I wish we would have made this twice as long. Uh, but to Jennifer's point, those resources, we'll include those in the follow-up as well. I believe those are the same ones you sent me, Jennifer, for my pre-read. And they're very worthwhile. I learned a lot. In this. I'm sure everybody else did too. I have questions, but I want to give the floor to our educators here. So, guys, again, if you have to get out of here and go back to your things, obviously do you. But Jennifer has some time to stick around and ask questions. So throw them in the chat and I'll bring them up. And while you guys are putting kind of your first questions, the one main one I was going to ask Jennifer was, and you kind of summed it up at the end with like a specific kind of actionable takeaway for things that educators can bring to their school. So I appreciate that. I guess my question just out of curiosity, is I hadn't really thought about kind of the difference between the proactive support that is generally in place at a high school level with the teacher knowing your IEP and accommodating proactively, hopefully, versus the big shift to post-secondary for the onus kind of being completely on the student. All this information I think would be super helpful for students and faculty and individuals at the post-secondary level to be aware of as well. How do we make those students aware of your research and your data?
Yeah, the post-secondary institutions are quite engaged and interested in it. I do give presentations often to them. So I would say that there's as much appetite on the post-secondary side to be inclusive as there is in the K to 12 side. But I'm sure a lot of K to 12 people would know that it's pockets, right? It tends to not be necessarily, you're probably talking to one teacher about, neurodiversity or like autism or learning difference, and they're like right there, and you're doing strategies and you're talking to another teacher or parent, and they know almost none of this information. You're sort of starting from square one.
Yeah.
So there's it's very yeah, there's pockets of innovation, but there's also a lot of pockets of people that don't understand why this is yet important. Accessibility services definitely understand the challenges of working with brand new students that I've highlighted here in terms of accommodations not coming through, in terms of the wait and see approach. They
Yeah.
don't know how to connect with high schools and guidance counselors and families in order to solve that challenge. So I
Yeah.
think there's actually want on both sides to do that. So, in that, I would, if someone here might be interested in it, it might be worth reaching out to a local institution, or if I might be able to make an introduction, maybe if you want to connect with me after about like how would that happen? Like, what would it look like to share information better? What would it look like to have students better aware of what those accommodations or supports look like? Because can you imagine if you think you're going to go to university and have every single thing you've had in high school, and you
Yeah.
show up and they tell you you have two? Like that's super devastating and not helpful, but it is the reality. So imagine before it'd be like, okay, these are the things that we know the school will give. Let's build out the supports and strategies you're going to bring with you that are you're in control of.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that's often missing.
Yeah, and I'm really happy you touched on the feedback piece too, and giving students a way to kind of practice that before they go and giving them feedback, how to handle those conversations.
It's so demoralizing for them or upset. It just, when you
Mhm.
feel like you're barely getting through and you just have what you need, and then someone seemingly takes it from you, it's just not helpful. So kind of reframing that as opposed to like, okay, let's figure out what it's going to look like versus you don't get everything you need can be a big thing. I'm just looking at the
Okay.
chat. I think we're
Yeah,
both reading the chat right now.
let
Are there
me.
any post-secondary programs that come to mind that are designed specifically for neurodivergent students? Yes, absolutely. The University of Victoria actually did a mapping exercise of neuro-inclusive post-secondary institutions. I'm going to find that and I'm going to send it through to Damien, who can share it. That I should have included that in this presentation. Sometimes I don't think of things till after. For example, like Algonquin College, this is in Ottawa, has a transition program, a full 4-year transition program for autistic students that helps support the transition to post-secondary. University of Calgary has a neurodiversity, neuroinclusive work integrated learning accelerator. McEwen's doing really interesting things. Laurier has an entrepreneurial neuroinclusive accelerator too. Like there are really, really cool things. I do mention some of them in the reports and some of the resources I have. So if you're interested, maybe take a look or feel free to connect with me directly too as well, because there are some exceptional programs. That being said, I think sometimes it's tricky to is the student just wanting to go to post-secondary to have opportunities to learn, and then that sort of program might be best. Sometimes students are really fixated on a certain program or a certain school. And when that's the case, that's often it really depends on the student and what their wants are, because some programs are just really not engineering programs. For example, a lot of them will refuse part-time, or just this idea that if you can't do it full-time, you can't be an engineer. That sort of gatekeeping and garbage actually does happen a lot in post-secondary. Like if you can't do it like this, you shouldn't be there. It's wildly inaccurate.
Yeah.
Neurodivergent students that have the cognitive capacity to learn these things and skills absolutely can, but they'll do it differently. So this idea that you have to do it one way to do it right is absolutely fundamentally wrong. But it's the stigma that students are going to meet at post-secondary. So preparing them preparing them to even think about how to respond to something like that sometimes is an important piece because that gatekeeping, they will experience that gatekeeping at some point in post-secondary, unfortunately.
1,000%.
I
Yeah.
know I don't like bad news, but I think sometimes knowing thy enemy helps with fighting thy enemy, and stigma and misunderstanding is absolutely the enemy of ND folk.
It's part of the system. Unfortunately, you
Yeah,
talked about knowing how to navigate the system. Yeah.
exactly.
Um, okay.
Uh,
Isabel, I have the PDFs of them. I'll include them with the recording. I just don't know how to share the PDFs with you right now in the chat properly. Um, do you want to tackle the one from Teresa, Jennifer?
yeah, memory boards during assessments. Yeah, I know. And this is where I really this is where like the advice I give that's practical versus the advice I give that actually would help better support students is not always the same. But yes, essentially the post high schools have done such a great job in rethinking assessment strategies that really work well for neurodivergent learners. But they are not going to get that help in a average program or a course in post secondary. They're going to sit an exam in a gym with 400 students, or they're going to be allowed to sit the exam in a smaller room with 5 students in a cubicle. Like those are the two options for mainstream academic programming. So, if it's a memory aid that can help transition with the student, or perhaps there is some license for some sort of accommodation, but honestly, some universities post-secondary saying no to calculators, which is absolutely not reasonable for someone with dyscalculia. But if they're not allowing a calculator, they're not gonna like that's the level of resistance you will meet around accommodations, around calculators, around note takers, around recording lectures. There is a really good chance it will be a no or it will be a fight. So, having other backups or other strategies or supports that are going to work is going to be really important because it's very unlikely that though that level of accommodation will be supported, unfortunately. And that is grossly unfair, but that is the current landscape. I just looking at Charlene's comment. Do you have any tips for coaching parents of ND students? Yes. I probably touched on some of them, but a lot of it is around. I feel like sometimes a lot of parents they put so much work into K to 12 in high school, and they're like honestly like dragging students through, they're pushing students through, like it's so difficult, and they're like, oh, university, we made it, go forth. But like this 18-year-old who barely made it through high school or like really struggled in June is now 2 months older in September in a brand new system that is completely confusing with less supports for them. So they are going to need continued support across that transition and starting. If they're like, I got it, don't worry, I'm on top of everything, everything's fine, do not believe them. They are drowning. Everyone is drowning in their first semester of university or college. It's not just neurotypical students, it is absolutely every single student. So parents really need to like trust your child, but also don't be like, oh, everything's fine, because again, students might like to hide. And again, if the lesson to learn is the student learns everything's fine and they bomb out, and that's a life lesson and natural consequence, like I get that too. Like at sometimes parents, do have to decide how much and when to step back. But also, that first semester of university or college is a rough time to learn a really big natural consequence life lesson of not being prepared for the system that they weren't prepared for because the K to 12 system was able to help so much that the gulf is now so big. So I think helping parents understand the gap in supports and help is so important because then at least the parents or family can perhaps work with a student to figure out where they might be able to support. Also, some students have no family support. So like I'm aware that like this is like a certain subset of students and families that are even eligible for this, but parents really don't have experience. If these are parents that did not go to post-secondary themselves, they actually don't even understand the system at all, let alone for their child. And then even if they did go to university 20, 30 years ago, it actually does look entirely different. And if they didn't need accommodations or supports, their experience is not relevant. So sometimes I think parents don't know what they need to know. I love giving parent sessions. If you want some materials or thoughts or have a large group of parents and things, like I think this information is really important and I really like to engage with that audience. Just sometimes trickier to find them. So if that's something that you do or you're interested in, I'd love to connect with you after.
We might also be able to help with the gym just because of all the school
Amazing.
boards we talk to. We can put it out to the school boards and see if we get one central place to bring all the parent kind of thing.
I love it because I actually think it's such a big piece. I think guidance counselors really can't do their jobs well without a lot of buy-in from parents and families, but I think it can be difficult to sort of I mean, you're also working with such diverse parents and families too. It's very tricky. So I'm just looking at Janet's connected with local institutions. Yeah, it was eye-opening to learn was not accommodated. Yeah, and this is what is very surprising to a lot of guidance counselors and parents is because they've done all this work to set these students up for success and everything they need, and then it's like and it's all taken away when they start. And that's devastating, but I think if it's framed a little bit better, like we're going to put all these in and then we might start weaning off, we're going to start scaling back a little, we're going to see, or figure out what strategies can put in place. Because if a student can't have a note taker, then maybe they need a tutor to go with them through the content after. Maybe they need to be using AI not to write their assignments, but to actually act as a fact checker or to summarize this or to rewrite their notes. So if a student can't have the accommodation they need in the class, what would it look like to set up the accommodation outside of the class? And that's what's needed. And that's usually where students fall down because they're like, they just don't know where to do or don't know how to go about getting it sorted.
Okay, wonderful. Guys, if you have any other questions, now's the time. Jennifer, I'll ask one more, and feel free to push back on this question because I understand there's nuance, and it's not a one size fits all. But if there's one thing, as an educator, I can leave this conversation with and implement today when I'm working with my students or talking to other educators who are working with their students, maybe it's the idea of having students starting to develop their own cognitive profile. Maybe it's this specific tactic of trying out body doubling. Right? Maybe it's finding a trusted mentor that can give me feedback on how to approach hard conversations. Like, if there were a Pareto principle, 80/20 kind of rule type thing for one thing I can implement today that will maybe move the needle a bit, do you know of something that I could leave with?
Yeah, thank you. I probably I will probably push back on maybe just the framing of it, but I think the
Sure.
very most important thing we need to understand is we actually really don't know very much about neurodiversity right now and individual neurotypes. Like I am often seen as like an expert in this space, again, because I do large scale research. I talk to people every day. I write, I read, I live, and I am still learning things on a weekly, monthly, sometimes daily basis as we move forward as a whole because we've really only been thinking about, say, autism or ADHD as disorders, as problems, as things to be fixed. Now, of course, I'm autistic myself. There are things about me that are challenging. I have some executive function challenges. I'm working on them. I want to build my skills. That's fine. But there's actually nothing foundationally wrong with me. It's a skill building gap and an inclusion gap in society. So I think we all need to remember that we actually are at the very beginning of actually understanding how different brains operate, how different people learn and think, and what it would look like to actually support neurodivergent learners at the same amount that society, schools, parenting, social supports neurotypical students. So if we can just remember we're all learners and we actually, a lot of things that we think we know are maybe problematic or that we don't know enough yet. I think it leaves us all the cognitive flexibility to keep learning and keep trying new things. Because if we're very certain that that's what autism is, or that's just
Mhm.
ADHD, or that's dyslexia, that's where we like actually stifle any sort of progress because we don't know what neurodivergent people can really do yet if they had the right supports because they've never had them. So let's just keep like building skill. And it's not about be your special person, whatever, you're fine because you are. Like, no, it's about skill building. It's about feedback, like good constructive feedback, and about a willingness to want to try things differently. And I think if that's something everyone took away from this presentation, I would be just so thrilled because I think progress starts there.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there's a few better places to have a beginner's mindset. Then let me rephrase my question. If I want to continue to learn
Yeah.
about the best things that I can do to support my students, are there any specific resources? Is it just sign up to the Signal 49 newsletter? Like, do you have any?
Yeah, I'm pretty busy creating these types of resources and support. So one, if anyone has an idea for things that are needed, I would love to know it too. Yeah, keep an eye out, and I would really specifically for high school students wanting to go to the workforce or post-secondary, it's really going to be around skill building around executive function deficits. So again, really just like helping that student be like, what are they great at? Where are the challenges and putting that in because the neurodivergent people have spiky skill profiles. So super good at some things, other things are so difficult that I'm hyperlexic. I can read 2 to 3 times the speed of most people, but I spell at a grade 5 level because I'm also very, very dyslexic. So I will never get better at spelling. It'll never happen. No matter what I do, I'm never just going to magically be better at spelling. I need strategies. I use read aloud function in Word. I have a lot of different things that I need to mask that gap because I cannot get better at it. But we don't do that for other neurodivergent students a lot. We just go, you're not good at it. We'll just put an accommodation. Put an accommodation. Accommodations should be about leveraging where the gap can't be closed, but most gaps can continue to be closed a little bit, especially for 18-year-olds. Their brains still have 6 years left of development in. So where are we not just relying on the accommodations, but really figuring about the skills and strategies they need to build? Because that's where that self-advocacy takes off. Otherwise, we're essentially creating people dependent on accommodations when we should be moving away from formal accommodations and people better being able to advocate for what they need and then systems being flexible to allow it. And I know that that's not simple, but that is really where we need to go. I don't think I answered your question, Damien. I'm so
Oh, you
sorry.
did. You did. You're doing a lot of work in this, and that sounds like that is the right direction that we need to go. I'm personally excited to hear more about the work integrated learning stuff that you're going to be doing next, right? So,
Yeah, thank
uh,
you. And hopefully to come back and maybe share some of those big
mhm.
pieces, because even for students who aren't going to post-secondary, they are ideally transitioning to the workforce, and that is just as big a problem for neurodivergent students as post-secondary. So again, it's those
Right.
transitions, it's that skill building, it's that understanding. So lots of good things to bring back next year if there's interest.
Well, yeah, you have an open invite, absolutely. And I'll talk to a colleague and think about how we can communicate with our board partners to figure out how we can work with you to get a date for parents so they can promote that if you're open to that. And
Love
for
that.
everyone who's still sticking around, we'll follow up with the recording. We'll follow up with those resources if you didn't grab them out of the chat. Jennifer, thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. We all have lots to learn, but I appreciate that you're the one helping us learn these things.
No, thank you so much. I just put my email in the chat there if anyone does want to follow up with me afterwards. And it was wonderful. Thanks everyone for spending some time with me today.
Cool. Thanks, guys.